It is day 108. I know it feels like 1,000,008, but no, 108 days into the second Trump administration. And today, the major stock indices closed out on a volatile day, actually on a high. Investors were weighing the possible two outcomes. One, the upcoming U.S. trade, I can't even get any words out tonight, U.S.-China trade talks that are going to happen over the next few days. And, of course, today's Fed decision to not cut rates. The Fed explained its move in a statement saying in part the following, quote, uncertainty about the economic outlook has increased further. What does that mean? Tough road could be ahead. Why? Tariffs. And this weekend, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is set to hold the administration's first high-level trade talks with Chinese officials. But it remains to be seen if there will be any sort of breakthrough that ends up in a deal. This is what the president said about the talks earlier today.
China says in order to have substantive negotiations, you have to bring down your 145% tariffs. Are you open to pulling back your tariffs in order to get China to the negotiating table?
No.
No. And this morning on Capitol Hill, Secretary Bessent was pressed for details about these negotiations. Here's what he said.
The trade negotiations will be led by myself and Ambassador Jameson Greer,
and
USTR.
And what about Pete Navarro?
Sorry?
Peter Navarro.
He will not be joining us in Geneva.
Are those negotiations considered advanced?
As I said, on Saturday, we will begin, which I believe is the opposite of advance.
Sending a signal to the markets. No, Pete Navarro will not be there. And tonight, Trump says he will announce tomorrow morning the first trade agreement since Liberation Day. The New York Times reports it will be with Great Britain. With that, let's bring in our nightcap. It is a great one. Evan McMorris Santoro joins us, reporter for Notice. Philip Bumpus here, a Washington Post columnist focused largely on the numbers behind the politics. Ahmed Baba is here, columnist for The Independent and author of the AhmedBaba.com News. And Dan Nathan is here, CNBC contributor and co-host of the Risk Reversal podcast. All right, Dan, the world's largest consumer, that is us, and the world's largest manufacturer, that is China, are actually going to take the first crack at easing these trade tensions. What should we expect?
Not a whole heck of a lot this weekend, you know, when you think
but
about
it's something.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like, again, we go back to the first tariffs that Trump put on China back in 2018, right? It took literally almost 2 years to get to phase one deal. It was January 2020, right? So this is really probably trying to de-escalate a little bit. I think that, you know, this whole idea of off-ramps, I don't know where they exist. I know that there's some reporting today is like, well, maybe fentanyl, some agreement on that front might, you know, take the tensions down a little bit. But when I think about China, and you just mentioned as a 30% of the world's manufacturing, right? And we're one of the biggest importers of their stuff. We face the risk of having a supply shock right here and then a demand shock over there. And the Chinese economy is very weak right now. It's much weaker than ours heading into this year. So I think that, you know, we run the risk of a protracted bear market, even with a bunch of uncertainty this year, of just seeing global growth just kind of melt a little bit, right? And that's why I think these bilateral deals, they have to come sooner than later. Even if there's no meat to them, I just think getting some of them out of the way and getting to a point where our allies can get behind us and we can start focusing on China.
But for some, it is surprising good news that this is happening, because just a week ago, China said, we're not doing anything unless you back off on these tariffs. And now China is showing up, at least for the first level of these negotiations, and we haven't given up anything.
Well, that thing that you mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast with the Fed chair talking about uncertainty rising, yeah. I don't know how much higher uncertainty can get. Like, how much more can there be? We talk about these trade deals. We talk about these conversations. We've seen so many steps get taken and taken back and shifted and go a different direction. You know, I talked to a lot of Republicans, you know, as part of my job, less investors in my job, and they're full of uncertainty too, right? They talk a lot about, like, we really hope this is going to work. We hope these plans are going to come out. We hope this stuff is going to happen for us. But nobody is really, like, convinced that anything is headed towards a certain direction, I don't think.
Okay, but you know who else is filled with uncertainty? Everyone. Because we have a president who watches late-night movies, Escape to Alcatraz, and wakes up the next day and says, I'm going to reopen that prison. So everyone's getting all jacked up today. Hey, Scott Bessent said Peter Navarro's not coming. I mean, I had like 38 dudes text me like, this is really good news. Navarro's not going to be there. Who are you kidding? Like, Peter Navarro was in jail this time last year. He didn't put himself in this administration. Trump did. So this idea that, like, without Peter Navarro there, it is going to be smooth sailing, it's Donald Trump that at any given moment could say any possible thing about tariffs or anything.
Yeah, and he could say no today and then tomorrow turn around and change his mind in terms of, easing some of the restrictions.
Or
I mean,
a movie he watched during lunch.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You watch Gung Ho and all of a sudden our policy's different.
That was an amazing reference.
Well, I appreciate that.
Okay, you just won the show.
Sure,
It doesn't matter what the rest of you
I'll be
say
leaving
for
now.
the next 59 minutes.
No,
you just referenced.
And it's funny because I was talking to Dan downstairs, and I love being here, but every couple of weeks we sit here and we have this same conversation, which is Donald Trump has these tariffs. The markets are hoping that they're going to go away. They don't really look like they're going to, but everyone's keeping their fingers crossed.